I just got these new upgraded valve springs from Benz Injection and thought it would be a great idea to make a video showing both the comparison of the upgraded valve springs compared to the stock valve springs and kind of go over some tips and tricks that will help you install these valve springs if you were to do this on ahead with the engine still in the car. Stock 606 spring is on the left, whereas the Benz Injection upgraded spring is on the right. Upgraded springs are about 50% stiffer than the stock OM606 springs. However, I did not measure any technical data, so no install rate, no lift rate for the new upgraded springs. I hope this video does serve justice in showing these springs are stiffer, these springs are beefier, and overall they're going to be an upgrade. And this upgrade is really viable to anybody since the stock 606 springs aren't too strong. It's fairly easy to experience valve flow. With the upgraded valve springs being beefier and being stiffer, you won't experience valve flow, or it diminishes the chances of experience valve flow. You shouldn't experience it as much. The idea being, with the stiffer spring, the valves can't hang up. They can't hold open, which is what valve float is. Now I have the stock 606 spring on the left again and the upgraded spring on the right. And the first characteristic I want to point out is just how beefy the coils are. The diameter of the coil themselves on the upgraded spring is a lot larger. Now here's the stock 606 spring. I'm trying to contort it here, I'm trying to flex it, I'm trying to visually show you guys how much effort is being required in flexing this spring. It's not too much. Especially compared to the Benz Injection spring, machining quality is nice on it. It's giving me quite a bit of resistance. I would say it's taking about twice as much effort to contort and to compress the spring the same amount. Here's visually with one hand on the stock 606 spring how much effort it takes, and the same amount of pressure is hardly moving the upgraded spring, so hands down these springs are definitely worth it. And if you're thinking about buying them, I highly suggest doing so. This upgrade can come across pretty challenging and pretty daunting, especially if you're a DIYer like myself. But with the right tools and the right mindset, it is most definitely possible. And with that, you should familiarize yourself with the official Mercedes maintenance manuals. These manuals are super helpful. They're currently free online, and if you read these manuals, especially the ones regarding installing the camshaft housing, installing the camshafts, installing the valve springs, this video will actually make sense as I'm only doing a partial installation. With that considered, these manuals don't exactly explain everything. Since they were made for Mercedes-Benz technicians, from the DIYer perspective, for me it was easy to kind of glance over or not understand some things. So I'm here to visually show you and explain some of these things that will hopefully help you as a DIYer install these valve springs at home. Ultimately, my guide is a partial installation, so along with watching this video, reading up on the official manuals, I highly suggest watching other build videos, particularly Heritage Steel's YouTube video on his OM606 installation. He shows exactly how to install and reinstall components like the camshaft housing, the inlet and the exhaust cam, and he does it real time on footage. Here's a glimpse of his video on YouTube, and at about 29 minutes in, you can watch him install the cam caps with the head still in the car. Most of these tools you'll be able to find in person. Some of them you'll have to find on Amazon or order online. The air compressor is optional depending on how you decide to hold up the valves. If you rotate each cylinder to top dead center, then theoretically you won't need an air compressor, but an air compressor is a great idea with the right attachment to hold up the valves. That way you don't necessarily have to rotate the engine. I found out that you can use this diesel injector puller tool to pull the timing chain pin. The diesel injector puller tool has M14 female threads. I found an adapter online that has M14 male threads and used that in addition with an M6 stud to pull the timing chain pin. This was the M14 by 1.5 male to female. And here's a website that sells the M14 male to M6 female, and here's another website that sells the M14 1 male to M6 1 male. And both, in addition to the diesel injector slide hammer tool, you'll be able to pull the timing chain pin and get the girdle out. You'll need a 27mm socket to turn the crank pulley, preferably shallow. You'll need thread chasers for this slide pin. You only need the M6x1 thread chaser, and this thread chaser, as you can see, will help clean out the internal threads of the slide pin, and that's crucial in ensuring that you can get the slide pin out easily. If you do decide to hold up the valves using an air compressor, you'll need a way to send that pressurized air into each cylinder, and that's where these attachments come into play. I took these attachments from a diesel compression tester kit. I highly recommend using the injector adapter opposed to the glow plug adapter. The injector adapter looks like a late style 603 injector, and normally you wouldn't be able to necessarily use this tool if you wanted to do a compression test on a 606. Since we're removing the girdle, we can actually use this tool in place of where the injector goes, and I'll show that later on in the video. If you pay attention to the threads, they're very similar to the late 603 style, but they're the exact same threads as the 606 injector, which is M22 by 1.5. Here I'm just comparing the glow plug adapter with an actual 606 glow plug. If you're doing this job on a W124 606NA, you're going to need a 9mm 12-point deep socket for the girdle, a 14mm wrench for the injector hard lines. A large crescent wrench will help get the radiator and some of the other larger bolts out of the way. I have a 1/4-inch flex head and a 3/8 flex head from Gear Wrench. These are the rubber handles. These get the job done. You're going to need a variety of extensions, but ultimately 2 will get the job done. This T40 made by Snap-on is a 1/4-inch. It's small, it's flexible, it lets you get into tight areas with just enough flexibility, like for the exhaust cam sprocket. You're going to need a torque wrench of some sort. I have this Gear Wrench digital one. You're also going to need a breaker bar. The breaker bar will help rotate the engine. I'm just demonstrating how you rotate the crank pulley. This is the valve spring remover and installer. It's an overhead compressor kit. I bought this kit off of Amazon. It's kind of a replication of the official Mercedes-Benz tool or the Miller tool. Those are pretty hard to find nowadays, and in addition to that tool, you're going to need 4 M6x1 screws. Ideally 30 to 35mm. I didn't have the 30 to 35mm, I had some longer ones, so I just used some washers. Now these screws will actually hold that valve spring compressor tool bracket down. They screw into where the valve cover screws into, and using washers I ensure that the bolt won't move on me. 17mm hex will help take out the timing chain tensioner, and also a variety of sockets, but you really just need an 8mm and a 10mm for most of this job. And I found the perfect donor car to work on to show you guys. So what I'm going to do is remove as much of the front end as possible to verify top dead center. After that, you're going to be good to go to pull this pin. And this is the only pin you have to pull to change out the springs. One that's recessed under this coolant line, you only have to worry about if you want to take the whole head off. We're going to start with these 10mm bolts, this auxiliary fan shroud, the actual fan clutch fan shroud. We're going to take off the radiator, start with these 10mm right here, and go from there. Notice, don't forget about this 10mm that holds this part. Once we get this out the way, we'll have access to disconnect the radiator. We'll have a little bit more room to theoretically slide a serpentine belt tool in with an 8mm stubby to get the fan clutch out. Once I took the top support bracket off, I see that there's another 2 10mm, looks like 4 10mm. There's going to be this expansion tank hose right here. There's going to be 2 coolant hoses down there. I already took this one off. That one's the drain, and there might be the hard line connected somewhere underneath there. If you're working on a turbo diesel model, this is the NA, by the way, 1996. If you're working on the turbo diesel model, don't forget about the intercooler. the intercooler will need to be disconnected, which is either a 10 or a 12 millimeter, or report back. Don't forget about these two banjo bolts. One banjo, another one down there. And this should slide up here, and it looks like we might have enough room with the condenser still attached. Just pulling it back a little bit, looks like we might have enough room to bring the tool in to pull this out. So we have this 8 millimeter hex to take this fan clutch off. This whole assembly will come out, or we could take out the fan itself, the blades, but I'm going to take this whole thing out. Here is the timing pointer. So we're just going to assume that this timing pointer is right. And what we want to do is we're going to spin this main harmonic balancer pulley bolt, crank bolt, until the notch on the left, right here where my finger's edging, this notch right here, on the very left, boom, 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 right here. We want that one at top dead center. Once that is at top dead center, we need to verify that we're on the compression stroke of top dead center, because you can be on the compression or the exhaust stroke. And we do that with the two cams. There's two dots that we look for, and then a 6 millimeter bolt that should pass through. Once all those are aligned and locked in, this should be at top dead center. This should be reading top dead center on this side. That's a rough way of knowing if you're in time or not, if the crank is in time with the head. The correct way is to screw in a dial gauge down here and measure it using this. And that way you can actually align this. But what we're going to do is just spin this 27 millimeter bolt, align this at top dead center, pull this and see where the dots are. I'm right before OT and I'll show you guys, but I'm going to pull the valve cover now and see if those two cam dots are aligned. If the two cam dots are aligned, that 6 millimeter bolt should basically pass through on the intake cam, and that's how you know the head isn't timed, one, with the crank. If the pin lines up with TD, then the pointer's correct. That's another verification too. And verify that we haven't spun the intake cam if that 6 millimeter bolt passes through, and I'll show you guys right now after I take this off. So down here, we are right before top dead center. Right there, we're right before it. And when I pull this off, hold on. Okay, we are looking for two dots to be aligned. We don't see them. We got to make one more pass around. Now, I made one full pass around on the crank, and as we're approaching top dead center is right here to the left. The marker's right here. It seems we have our pointers. So this should start lining up with this on the back of the first cam cap. On the back of this first cam cap where the inlet cam sits, 6 millimeter bolt should pass through this hole when you're at top dead center, and we are right before it. This pin sits in the girdle right here, so you cannot take the girdle out and get access to the springs without doing all of this. Slowly pulling the pin out, and we barely are clearing the condenser with everything still attached. So again, only the first pin has to come out in order to get the girdle out to be able to replace the springs. The bottom pin can stay in. The bottom pin must come out if you want to take the head out. And just like that, the homemade puller worked. We got the first pin out just to show you guys that it can be done. So this pin was a sucker. This little 2.5 pounder. This condenser staying in. We got the chain tensioner loose, 17 millimeter hex, or that big nut right there. I just used the crescent just to crack it. Zip tie this sprocket to the chain and make sure you get 1, 2, 3, replace these bolts. You can either zip tie the sprocket to the chain, or you can follow the Mercedes-Benz manual, which states that you can mark the exact location of the sprocket to the timing chain. You have the difference based on how you want to hold up the valves. Either you want to rotate the engine, or you want to keep everything zip tied and hold up each cylinder with compressed air. With the head on the table, I'm gonna explain some things a little bit more in depth. So this is the only pin that needs to come out, and this pin actually holds the girdle in place. Get your M6x1 thread chaser, you screw it in, and then with the 8mm and 1/4 inch, you crank this down. It goes in very gently and very smoothly. Getting that dirt out is crucial in ensuring that your slide hammer tool will go in and screw in nicely. At the end of the day, you're going to be pulling on these threads, so you want to make sure these threads are as clean as possible. Once you take out all the injector lines, you'll remove the black PCV piping. That black piping will come out. Now the whole valve cover is ready to be taken out. Take your 10mm. Ideally with an extension, it makes the job a little bit easier, and you'll remove all your 10mm valve cover bolts. Here's one of them. Here's the second, the third, the fourth. You'll go around and unscrew all the valve cover bolts. So once you remove the whole valve cover, now we're going to want to verify that the head itself is at top dead center. All the cam caps come out. You evenly undo the cam caps with the 9mm 12 point. You're working on a 124, you're going to need this deep one. The deep one fits right into here. Second and on the fifth, have the deep 9mm 12 point. So the cam caps come out. You're able to carefully remove the inlet cams, the inlet cam and the exhaust cam. Chain already, this one I have cut for video purposes. The tensioner, you can undo the tensioner with the 17mm. Probably, there we go. Probably got messed up just a little bit. So then the girdle comes out. We have the valves exposed. You're using this tool, this comes in handy. So this tool will actually thread in to where your injector will go, where it will normally go. That one's bad because I haven't cleaned it out. But there we go. So when you're working on the valves, you know, if you're not at top dead center, if you don't rotate the engine, you're going to use this tool and or this tool. So this tool will be able to hold the valves up when you decide to work on these. And this is how they're grouped up. These four, these four, these. What you're going to do is you're going to screw this tool in, firstly, and you're going to add compressed air. Now, since we already removed the girdle, we already did that at top dead center. So cylinder 1 and cylinder 6 are already at top dead center. So you don't really need to do this for cylinder 1 and 6, but it's a good idea. Shop air goes in, and then now we're able to take our overhead valve spring compressor and jimmy rig it. There's a problem with using this tool though for the first cylinder. The problem is only one hole lines up. So as you can see, there's not a space for me to line up both holes to get this even. So you kind of have to rotate it and adjust it as necessary. And I'll do that on the first one and show you guys exactly how to do this on the hardest one. So here's what I did. I took my spacers. This is the M6 by 1 thread pitch. Let's get this lined up. I just kept it a little loose because I still want to rotate it and adjust it to my liking. Now I'll take this other one, and the bar passes through here, so we just have to make sure it's lined up enough. So I'm going to try and go for this one. Now the difficult part is adjusting the bar and the tool and getting them to work. But I found out it is definitely possible with just a little ingenuity. So for example, this one, if I have the bar just a little bit up more, I'll be able to And I like using a magnet for this part. What I'll do is I'll compress it, I'll expose the keepers, and I'll use a magnet to get both keepers, and I'll slowly decompress it. And now you're able to remove the two keepers. Got one keeper in, I'm going to try to get the other keeper in. So just doing this with my fingers, I'm going to try and get the other keeper in, one-handed. Ah! Let me see if this is magnetized. Nope. Okay. There we go. Okay, no excuses. And there we go. So now, as you can see, this valve is done. The keeper's in place. The valve spring's good to go. You have these O-rings that sit here. You have 6 of them. Since everything is already out, it makes sense replacing these. We're going to take the cam girdle. We're going to gently line it up. And we can feel when they engage the dowel pins. Now, evenly in the head. We are going to take our exhaust cam. We gently place our first cam, and then same thing with the intake cam. Both dots are lined up. I have both dots lined up, but as you can see, the cams do not fit in flush. And this is where I highly recommend watching Heritage Steel's video. He explains exactly how to rotate these and install the caps accordingly so that the cams are pressed down evenly. Some of these valves are being pressed down even at top dead center. For some other cars, you can get away just gently rotating back and forth, but with a dual overhead, it's a little bit more tricky. So there's a couple different tips and tricks for this. One, the first tip and trick is to not do the sprocket to the zip tie chain method. You simply mark the exact precise location of the sprocket to the timing chain, so you'll be able to rotate the crank and rotate the cams to be able to tighten down the caps evenly. I think that's really the only method. I think Heritage Steel goes over more in depth on how to install each cam cap and torque it down evenly. You want to find the first cap where the cams basically sit in almost near flush. And then I would evenly go through and, according to the manual, torque down some special sealant on this pin. You'll gently hammer this pin in here, and that way the girdle is now secured to the head. The cams are in time. The 6mm bolt will pass through, and again, after verifying all of this upon reinstallation, before you add the valve cover gasket, your valve cover, the injector hard lines, I would highly recommend keeping this exposed and turning the crank over once the sprocket is back on, torque to spec, and just verify that nothing funny is happening here. There's no resistance, there's nothing loose, there's nothing odd, and I would give 2 full revolutions around, ensuring that you can easily turn the engine by hand. If you're doing this with the breaker bar, at any moment if you feel resistance, stop, because there's a chance that something isn't timed up right. So after 2 full revolutions, I would take a look again and make sure at top dead center everything lines up. And after a 3rd visual inspection, I would then reinstall the valve cover gasket, reinstall the valve cover, add the injection lines, add the PCV valve, add the injection return lines, bleed the system and start it up, and you should be good to go.